You've just finished another 14-hour day at the office. Your shoulders ache from hunching over spreadsheets and client presentations. The last train home is crowded with other exhausted workers, all of us swaying together in silence as the cars rock through the darkness beneath Tokyo. When you finally reach your station, when you finally climb those concrete steps back to street level, when you finally unlock the door to your small apartment, there's nothing waiting for you. No voice calling your name. No warm light left on. No messages on your phone except automated reminders about bills and appointments. Just four walls and the distant hum of your neighbor's television through paper-thin barriers. This was Aya Tanaka's reality every single night for 3 years running, 27 years old, living alone in a cramped one-room apartment in Saitama, commuting 2 hours each way to her job at a marketing firm in central Tokyo. Her days followed the same exhausting pattern without variation. Wake up at 5:30, shower quickly, grab a rice ball and coffee from the convenience store downstairs, join the crush of bodies on the morning express train, sit at her desk until the cleaning crew arrived. Take the last train back to empty silence. Aya had moved to the Tokyo area, straight from university, full of dreams about city life and career success. She'd imagined making friends with her coworkers, joining after-work social groups, maybe finding someone special to share those tiny apartment walls with. But the reality of urban life had worn her down gradually, like water eroding stone. Her colleagues were polite but distant, too busy with their own overwhelming schedules to form real connections. The few times she'd tried to join group activities, the conversations felt forced and shallow, full of workplace gossip and complaints about train delays. Most evenings, she would lie in bed staring at her phone, scrolling through social media posts of people who seemed to have effortless friendships and active social lives. The isolation felt heaviest during those quiet hours when the city finally settled into sleep around her. She would listen to the sounds filtering through her windows: distant traffic, the occasional siren, footsteps in the hallway outside her door that never stopped at her threshold. Sleep came reluctantly most nights. Her mind would race with thoughts about deadlines and presentations. But underneath that professional anxiety lay something deeper and more persistent, a loneliness that had grown so familiar it felt like another organ in her body. Always present but rarely acknowledged directly, she'd started talking to herself just to hear a human voice in her apartment, carrying on conversations with her reflection while brushing her teeth or preparing simple meals for one. That's how she discovered the app on a particularly difficult Tuesday evening in early March. She'd been browsing online forums about urban loneliness, reading posts from other people who described similar feelings of isolation despite being surrounded by millions of other human beings. Someone had shared a link to an article about new digital solutions for social connection, and there it was. An advertisement for something called Companion Link, a service that promised to address what they called the modern epidemic of urban solitude. The concept seemed almost too strange to be real at first glance. You could rent a friend for a few hours, not for romance or anything inappropriate, the marketing materials made clear, but simply for human companionship, someone to have coffee with, to walk around the city with, to talk to about whatever was weighing on your mind. The service claimed to provide therapeutic social interaction and meaningful human connection for busy professionals who struggle to maintain traditional friendships. Aya found herself downloading the app at midnight, sitting cross-legged on her narrow bed with the phone's blue glow illuminating her face in the darkness. The interface was designed in soft pastels, all gentle curves and friendly fonts that made the whole concept feel harmless and welcoming. The homepage featured smiling faces of people who looked like they could be your coworkers or neighbors, ordinary individuals offering a few hours of their time to help combat loneliness. The profiles were surprisingly detailed and professional looking. Each companion had written a brief introduction describing their interests and communication style. Some specialized in listening to work-related stress. Others offered to accompany users to museums or cafes, or simply walk around familiar neighborhoods while engaging in casual conversation. The pricing was reasonable, much less expensive than therapy sessions or even most restaurant meals. User reviews painted pictures of positive experiences, people describing how much better they felt after spending time with these rented friends. What struck Aya most was how normal it all seemed. These weren't actors or performers, just regular people who had signed up to provide social support to others, facing similar challenges with isolation and urban loneliness. The service had been featured in several mainstream news articles about innovative approaches to mental health and community building in modern Japan. Customer testimonials spoke about feeling heard and understood, about remembering what it was like to have genuine human conversation without the pressure of long-term social obligations. She spent nearly an hour scrolling through different profiles, reading the introductions, and looking at the photographs. Some companions were her age, others older or younger. Some had interests that aligned with hers. Others offered perspectives from completely different backgrounds and life experiences. The variety was impressive, and the screening process seemed thorough based on the information provided about background checks and user safety protocols. Eventually, her attention settled on one profile that seemed to match what she was looking for. Riku Moriyama, age 29. According to his listing, his photograph showed a man with a soft smile and neatly styled dark hair, wearing a simple button-down shirt that suggested he understood professional environments. His written introduction was brief but thoughtful, explaining that he enjoyed quiet conversations about books, movies, and the small observations that make city life interesting rather than overwhelming. What appealed to Aya most was his rating and experience level. 4.9 stars out of 5, with over 200 completed sessions spanning the past 8 months. His reviews were consistently positive, with users describing him as a good listener who never made them feel judged or rushed. Several people mentioned that conversations with Riku had helped them process work stress and feel more connected to their surroundings. One reviewer wrote that he had an unusual ability to notice details about people and places that others might overlook, making even familiar locations feel fresh and worth exploring. The booking process was straightforward and professional. Aya selected a 2-hour session for the following Saturday afternoon, choosing a popular cafe near Ikebukuro Station as their meeting location. The app prompted her to provide some basic information about her interests and what she hoped to gain from the experience, which she filled out honestly. She mentioned feeling isolated despite living in such a densely populated area, and expressed interest in having someone to talk to about the challenge of maintaining personal identity while navigating demanding professional expectations. After confirming her booking and payment through the secure system, Aya received an automated message confirming the details and providing Riku's contact information for any last-minute coordination. She set her phone aside and tried to sleep, but found herself lying awake, wondering what their conversation would be like and whether this unusual solution might actually help her feel less alone in the world. Saturday arrived with the kind of gray sky that made Tokyo feel smaller than usual, clouds hanging low over the concrete maze of buildings and train tracks. Aya woke up earlier than necessary, spending extra time choosing what to wear for her first rental friend experience. She settled on a simple sweater and jeans, Nothing too formal, but presentable enough for meeting a stranger who would be paid to spend time with her. The train ride to Ikebukuro felt longer than usual, despite taking the same route she used for work. She found herself checking her phone repeatedly, rereading Riku's profile and the confirmation message that had arrived the night before. His communication had been brief, but warm, suggesting they meet at a small cafe called Moonlight Coffee near the east exit of the station. He'd included a photo of himself holding a small sign with her name, explaining that this would help them recognize each other in the crowded weekend foot traffic. Moonlight Coffee turned out to be exactly the kind of place she would have chosen herself. Quiet, without being empty, with soft lighting and mismatched furniture that felt welcoming rather than institutional. Aya arrived 15 minutes early and claimed a table near the window where she could watch for Riku's approach. She ordered a latte and tried to calm the nervous energy that had been building since she'd first downloaded the app. At exactly 3 o'clock, she spotted him walking toward the cafe entrance. He looked almost identical to his profile photograph, which surprised her given how often people used outdated or heavily filtered images online. Same gentle smile, same neatly styled hair, same understated clothing that suggested someone comfortable in professional environments. He carried himself with a relaxed confidence that immediately put her at ease. "Aya Tanaka?" he asked as he approached her table, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. She nodded and stood to greet him properly, noting how his handshake was warm but not overly familiar. Everything about his demeanor suggested someone experienced at making nervous clients feel comfortable. "Thank you so much for meeting me today," Aya said as they both settled into their seats. "I have to admit, this is my first time using a service like this." Riku's smile widened slightly. "I'm honored to be part of your first experience with Companion Link, though I have to say, you seem much more relaxed than most people during their initial sessions. Usually clients are quite anxious about the whole arrangement." Something about his phrasing struck her as slightly odd, though she couldn't identify exactly what. Maybe it was how he said initial sessions, as if he expected there would be multiple meetings, or perhaps the way he seemed to be studying her face while he spoke. But his voice was so gentle and reassuring that she dismissed the feeling as her own nervousness. They talked easily for the first hour, covering safe topics like work stress and the challenges of urban living. Riku was an excellent listener, asking thoughtful follow-up questions and sharing relevant observations about city life that made her feel understood rather than analyzed. He had a way of making even mundane topics feel worth discussing, and Aya found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't experienced in months. "You know," Riku said as he finished his second cup of tea, "I'm really glad you decided to reach out again. It's been too long since we've had a chance to talk properly." Aya paused, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "I'm sorry, what did you mean by again?" "This is our first time meeting." Riku's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Oh, of course. I misspoke. Sometimes I feel like I know clients so well from their profiles that it seems like we've met before. You wrote such a thoughtful introduction about your situation." She laughed nervously, though the explanation didn't quite satisfy the unease that had suddenly surfaced. "I don't remember writing much detail in that form, just basic information about wanting someone to talk to." "Your workplace situation sounds particularly stressful," he continued smoothly. "Marketing firms can be demanding environments. How long did you say you've been at Yamamoto and Associates?" The unease crystallized into something sharper. She had never mentioned her company's name anywhere in her profile or booking information. She was certain of that because she'd been careful about maintaining privacy boundaries when signing up for the service. The app's terms of service had specifically stated that personal details beyond first names and general interests would remain confidential. I don't think I mentioned my company name, she said carefully, watching his face for any sign of recognition or concern. But Riku's expression remained perfectly calm, his smile never wavering. Didn't you? I must have gotten that impression from something you said. These conversations blend together sometimes. Would you like to take a walk? This cafe is getting quite crowded, and I know a quieter area nearby where we can continue talking. Aya glanced around the coffee shop, which seemed no more crowded than when they'd arrived. But something in Riku's tone suggested this wasn't really a request, and she found herself nodding agreement despite the growing feeling that something wasn't quite right about this interaction. They left the warmth of the cafe and stepped into the cool afternoon air. The weekend crowds around Ikebukuro Station moved in predictable patterns, streams of people flowing between shopping centers and train entrances. But Riku led her away from the main thoroughfares, down side streets that grew progressively quieter and less well lit despite the early hour. I come this way often, he explained as they walked past closed storefronts and narrow alleys. It's one of the few places in this area where you can actually hear yourself think. Too many people stick to the obvious routes and miss the more interesting parts of the city. His knowledge of these back streets seemed comprehensive, as if he'd spent considerable time exploring every corner of this particular neighborhood. He moved with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with the area, never hesitating at intersections or checking street signs for direction. Aya noticed he stayed slightly behind her as they walked, his footsteps so light she sometimes had to glance back to confirm he was still there. "How long have you been working for Companion Link?" she asked, partly to fill the growing silence, and partly because she was genuinely curious about how someone ended up in this unusual profession. "Time has a way of becoming fluid in this line of work," Riku replied, which wasn't really an answer. "What matters more is the connections we make with people who need genuine human contact. So many individuals in this city are struggling with isolation, just like you've been experiencing." Again, something about his phrasing felt off. She didn't recall describing her situation as a struggle with isolation, though perhaps that had been implied in her booking request. Maybe she was overthinking his word choices because the whole situation was so outside her normal experience. They had been walking for nearly 20 minutes when Riku stopped beside a narrow passage between two older buildings. The space was barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side, and it disappeared into shadows that suggested it connected to another street, or perhaps a small courtyard. "There's something I'd like to show you back here," he said, gesturing toward the darkened passage. "A little shrine that most people never notice. It's quite peaceful, and I think you'd appreciate the quiet atmosphere." Aya hesitated at the mouth of the alley. The rational part of her mind recognized this as exactly the kind of situation she should avoid. Following a stranger she'd just met into an isolated space away from public view. But Riku's demeanor remained so calm and unthreatening, and she found herself reluctant to seem rude or paranoid after he'd been so kind and attentive. "I should probably head back to the station soon," she said, checking her phone for the time. "I don't want to take up more of your evening than we agreed on." "Of course," Riku said, his smile never changing. "Just a quick look. It will only take a moment, and then I'll walk you back to the station myself. I insist on making sure you get there safely." Safely? The alley stretched ahead of them like a throat waiting to swallow. Fluorescent light from a distant vending machine cast thin shadows across cracked pavement, creating patterns that seemed to shift as they walked deeper into the narrow space between buildings. The sounds of the busy street behind them faded quickly, replaced by the kind of silence that only exists in forgotten corners of the city. Aya's footsteps echoed strangely off the concrete walls, but Riku's remained completely silent despite the fact that he was wearing leather shoes. She glanced back at him once and noticed he moved with an unusual lightness, as if he'd spent years learning to walk without making sound. His smile remained exactly the same as it had been in the coffee shop, never wavering or changing expression. "The shrine is just ahead," he said softly, his voice carrying an odd quality in the enclosed space. "It's one of those places that somehow survived all the urban development most people walk right past without noticing it." They emerged into a small courtyard surrounded by the backs of older buildings. Sure enough, there was a tiny shrine tucked against one wall, barely larger than a phone booth. Red paint peeled from its wooden frame, and weeds grew thick around its foundation. A few withered flowers lay scattered near the entrance, offerings left by someone who might have visited weeks or months ago. "It's dedicated to lost souls," Riku explained, approaching the shrine with his hands clasped behind his back. "People who disappeared from this area over the years. Their families built this place so they'd have somewhere to rest if they ever found their way back." Something cold settled in Aya's stomach as she looked at the forgotten memorial. The courtyard felt completely cut off from the world, surrounded by windowless walls and narrow passages that seemed to lead in too many directions. She couldn't hear any traffic or voices from the streets beyond, just the distant hum of air conditioning units and the soft whisper of wind moving through the confined space. "How do you know so much about it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Riku turned toward her, and for the first time since they'd met, his expression seemed different. Not threatening exactly, but more focused, as if he was studying her face with new interest. "I spend a lot of time in places like this, quiet spaces where people can talk without being overheard or interrupted." He moved closer to where she stood, his footsteps still making no sound on the concrete. "You mentioned in your profile that you feel invisible sometimes, living in a city surrounded by millions of people, but feeling like no one really sees you." Aya frowned, trying to remember exactly what she'd written in her booking request. She was certain she hadn't been that specific about her feelings, and definitely hadn't used the word invisible, but Riku continued speaking before she could respond. "I understand that feeling completely. Sometimes I think about how easy it would be for someone to simply disappear in a place like Tokyo, just slip away between the crowds and the train schedules and the apartment buildings full of strangers no one would notice for days, maybe weeks." The casual way he spoke about disappearing made her skin crawl. She took a step back toward the passage they'd used to enter the courtyard, but Riku seemed to anticipate her movement. Without appearing to hurry, he positioned himself between her and the exit, still smiling that unchanging smile. "I should really get back to the station," Aya said, pulling out her phone to check the time. "Thank you for showing me this place, but I don't want to miss the last train." "Of course," Riku agreed. "Just one more minute. I wanted to ask you something before we go." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the dim light from the vending machine beyond the courtyard. It looked like a phone, but the model was several years old and had a cracked screen that reflected the faint illumination in fractured patterns. "Do you recognize this?" he asked, holding it out toward her. Aya stared at the damaged device, confusion replacing some of her anxiety. "No, why would I recognize it? It belonged to another client of mine, someone very much like you, actually. Same age, same job situation, same feelings of isolation." His voice remained gentle, but something underneath it had changed. She also liked to meet at coffee shops near train stations. The implications of what he was saying hit her like cold water. Aya's hand tightened around her own phone, as she realized how completely alone they were in this hidden courtyard. No security cameras, no witnesses, no way for anyone to know where she'd gone or who she was with. Aya Tanaka never returned to her small apartment in Saitama that Saturday evening. Her phone was discovered the following morning near the forgotten shrine, its screen cracked and the battery completely drained. When her coworker tried to reach her after she failed to show up for work on Monday, the messages went unanswered. The police investigation began routinely enough. Missing person reports in Tokyo are filed every day, and most resolve within 48 hours, but this case proved different. When investigators attempted to contact Companion Link about Riku Moriyama, they encountered something unprecedented. The company's customer service representatives insisted that no user by that name had ever been registered on their platform. His profile, complete with the 4.9-star rating and over 200 completed sessions, had vanished entirely from their system. Security footage from Ikebukuro Station showed Aya walking with a male figure toward the back streets behind the east exit. But the man beside her appeared strangely distorted in every frame, his face consistently blurred despite the high-quality cameras. Technical analysis revealed no equipment, malfunction, or digital tampering. The footage simply showed a woman walking alongside someone whose features refused to be captured clearly. The case was classified as a missing person investigation and remains officially unsolved. But something troubling began emerging in the months that followed. New users of Companion Link started reporting encounters with a man matching Riku's exact description. Same soft smile, same neatly styled hair, same gentle demeanor, same ability to know details about their lives that they'd never shared. Each time these reports were investigated, the company would deny any knowledge of such a user. The pattern repeated with disturbing consistency. Women would meet this friendly companion for coffee near train stations. They would text friends about feeling slightly unsettled but safe. Then the messages would stop. Their phones would be found days later in quiet corners of the city, always near small shrines or forgotten memorial spaces. Aya Tanaka never came home, and the app she trusted still claims Riku Moriyama was never a real person. But late at night, new users still report matching with a man who has the same unchanging smile, always waiting at the same stations, always offering the same gentle companionship to those who need it most, always waiting for someone to rent him.